Welcome to The Real Math of Business with Alena Bennett, where you plus this podcast equals better decisions. I'm Alena Bennett, speaker, author, and leadership expert. I work with chief executive officers and chief financial officers really to help them create universally investable companies where people serve people and the math just works. This week, I'm chatting with our returning guest, Brent Forrester. But first, here is my thought-provoking question. So this week's thought-provoking question is inspired by our first conversation with Brent, really around, how he has had to adapt to the changing entertainment industry in terms of how comedy is created, produced and released to the market. And I'm looking forward to hearing more about that today. But it has inspired this week's thought-provoking question, which is, what is a status quo that you are actively trying to challenge? And what I like in that question is its simplicity. What is a status quo that you are actively trying to challenge? So there's a couple of key elements I want to break down. What's a status quo? So when you're thinking about answering this honestly, I want you to think about the things that drive you nuts at work, the things, or maybe outside of work as well. What are the things that frustrate you, that you find yourself constantly on a loop coming back to in conversation or in thought? So that might be considered, or that might be a good example for you of a status quo that you're trying to challenge, right? So if you find yourself coming back, oh, that's so annoying, that's so frustrating, or that drives me nuts, pisses me off, that might be a status quo that you have an intention or a desire to challenge. I guess the second part to this key question, and why it's probably a little more provocative, is the little bit in the middle that you're actively trying to challenge. One of the things that frustrates me to no end, and I am guilty of this at times for sure, is that we kind of go on in circles and we create this negative loop about something that frustrates us, but we don't do anything about it. But we fall into this trap that because I'm constantly thinking about it, because I'm constantly whinging about it, I am on the mission to challenge it. Or in actual fact, that's not going to change anything. So I want you to think of the two parts to the question. What's a status quo that you would like to challenge? And what are you actively doing to try to challenge that status quo? I'd be really interested in what you come up with here. I am acting you're actively, what are you actually doing? How are you actioning the challenge as a bit of an accountability piece for you? What's a status quo that you're actively trying to challenge? And now to our chat with Brent Forrester. Well, it's an absolute pleasure to welcome back Brent Forrester to the podcast again. Brent Forrester won his first comedy writing Emmy at age 25 for his work on The Ben Stiller Show. He went on to write for The Simpsons, helped launch King of the Hill, and was a producer and director, as well as running the writer's room at NBC's The Office during its 7 seasons. He's written for Late Night with Conan, HBO's Mr. Show and The Larry Sanders Show, and continues to work as head writer on Netflix shows like Judd Apatow's Love and Steve Carell's Space Force, along with Amazon shows like Greg Daniels' Upload and People of Earth. And now he has released episode 1 of his new show, Historic Freedomburg, on the Professor Bifo YouTube channel. Congratulations!
Woo! Thank you
Yes.
so much. It is manifestly the smallest thing I've done, but also the biggest thing in a funny way. It's like, it's merely YouTube, but there's something about being the creator of your own thing. It doesn't matter how many people see it. It's the most significant thing of all. So thank you for your congrats.
Wow. Well, hey, I got to say, literally, it just dropped a couple of days ago, right? So I feel so privileged that you've chosen to come back and speak with us again, because I feel like we are right at the precipice of this beginning of the new you, Professor Bifo. I was even going, hang on a second, we got to flip this bio around. Like, we should be leading with Professor Bifo and then going into all the other stuff, but maybe that's for the next one. It's so interesting. want to pick being the creator of your own thing. And I think that's so relevant because when we spoke last time, when we talked about success, you talked about how you'd kind of gone from that economic scarcity, I forget what you called it, but then really talking about success now is about really leaning into this creative process. And so I can understand this feeling of joy and fulfillment of being the creator end to end of your own thing. Like, tell me,
Yes.
tell me
Hmm.
about the launch. Tell me about how it's gone. What have you heard from people? I've got my opinions, but I want to hear how it's been through the lens of you.
Thank you. Well, it's really interesting. I think this is true of all artists that we crave being the one at the top. Of course, that's what artists are. A painter doesn't paint typically for somebody else. You're not, on a team of painters and then there's a head painter, and the same is true of authors and every art form. Typically, the artist is an individual expressing themselves. And television comedy in that way is a little bit unique because it's typically done in groups. And I've always been within that group as a staff writer or, rising up to the highest levels of that group, the head writer, but I've never been the creator of a show. And it turns out that it is the significant missing piece of the puzzle of creative satisfaction. Simply to be the final word, is quantumly relevant. So, that's been a fun experience. The show that I've created for YouTube, I funded it myself, so it's got this tremendously low budget. I mean, you you can feel the lack of budget when you watch it, and that bothered me a little bit. Like at a certain point, I was like, looking at the clips, the footage coming in, I'm starting to edit it, and I was like, okay, there's a reason people don't make stuff for virtually no money. If they could make stuff that was super high quality at super low budget, they would. Why would you spend more money than you have to? So, I had a moment of almost despair when I looked at my first edit. But as I began to, put it together and look through takes and find funny takes, and um, I realized that in fact there's almost an authenticity that comes across when stuff is super low budget. Like punk rock would not be punk rock if it was super slickly produced, right? And so there's something kind of anti-corporate and anti-establishment about things being really, shoestring. So that's fun. I will say that I also had a tremendous learning experience just trying to be the producer of my own material. I didn't have the luxury of hiring a producer. I just had to figure out, like, okay, so we lost our location. What do we do now? Find another location. All of our props and wardrobe were tied to the location that we lost. Where do we get wardrobe in 24 hours? I mean, I literally went to the theater up the block from me and said, "Do you guys have any old timey costumes that I can rent?" And I gave them $100 bill and just cleaned out their wardrobe and put it in my car. I mean, it was that level of bootstrapping, do it yourself, that ended up being kind of, part of the pleasure of it was uh, connecting with friendly local people to help me get something made. I had this amazing challenge where, if you watch the show, it's set at a tourist site where they reenact American history. And I had leaned into this visual gag where the Thomas Jefferson impersonator ends up in a stockade, which is like that wooden thing where you put your head and your hands through the, little wooden trap and they put you in the town square. So, that was my ending visual joke. When I lost my location, I lost the prop. And I'm like, well, I don't have an ending visual. Like, what am I going to do? I went to the hardware store, I got the lumber, and I just built a stockade with my very handy girlfriend who has a lot of power tools. And, so that becomes part of the, you know, story of the making of it. And I guess in retrospect, it becomes part of the fun of it. Um, the whole thing has been a clinic in the wisdom of just saying, I am going to do this, and no matter what comes in my way, we'll solve the problems, rather than, oh gee, we don't have the budget, we don't have the production, let's quit. Something happens when you say, we're doing this no matter what, and somehow we'll get through.
I love that. Before we go on, um, do you want to describe it, episode 1, just so for anyone who
Yeah.
hasn't had the privilege, I mean, absolutely, you've got to. I've watched it so many times, and I just laugh at different things every time. Do you wanna just quickly, give a high-level description of what episode 1 is?
Yes, yes, yes. In fact, I'll give you a little backstory. This idea for a comedy first hit me 30 years ago when I visited a tourist site called Colonial Williamsburg in Virginia. And it's the most famous of the American history reenactor sites. And they had a guy playing Thomas Jefferson, and they had an actor playing Jupiter Evans, who is famously the enslaved Black manservant of Thomas Jefferson. And it was fascinating to watch, and it was also fascinating to see how they were grappling and kind of not grappling with the very troubling history of America, in which one of our saintly founding fathers was also a human trafficker, not to mince words. So as a writer for The Simpsons, I of course got a feeling for anti-authoritarian, edgy, challenging comedy. And I thought, this is such a fun zone to play in. I pitched this thing in various forms many, many times over my career, and I could never, ever get anyone to buy it. Uh, the problem is that the material is legitimately challenging. When you go to make comedy there, what you find is the controversy makes it the controversy at the heart of the material. Specifically, the fact that you're playing in this area of racial sensitivity makes it impossible for anyone to put their money behind. Uh, and in fact, it's difficult even sometimes to convince actors. The white actors were very difficult to convince. They would say, Jesus, this could end up being, hurtful to non-white people, right? A super legitimate concern for any actor with any feelings. The key to doing it was bringing in the Black collaborators. First, my Black writer friends, I would talk to them about it, share it with them, and say, how am I going to embarrass myself with this? I'm thinking of my friend Trevor Brown, who's a great writer and performer. I asked him early on, what's the Black perspective on this material? Where is it funny? Where is it, hurtful? So that was useful. And then when I got this great actor, Wayne Wilderson, to, be the actor, suddenly everything came together, because if Wayne was laughing, I knew it was cool. So, the comedy basically really centers around those two characters that initially interested me: the actor playing Thomas Jefferson and the actor playing Jupiter Evans. I hit on the comedy of the white guy pretty early on. It's the comedy of a guy who's used to being celebrated as Thomas Jefferson, and now feels like the culture has changed, the audience has changed. He can't admit that he's no longer the hero. And so that, I always thought, was a funny element of pomposity with a degree of cultural relevance. But where it really took off was when Wayne Wilderson came aboard the project, and I started doing table reads with him. And I realized that Wayne is the point of view character, that he's the guy who, like Jim Halpert on The Office, is the guy you relate to, and the guy whose eyes you are seeing through. Jim Halpert,
Huh.
Jim on The Office, is the guy who keeps looking at camera and going, are you seeing this? And Wayne becomes that in Historic Freedomburg. So that was a huge breakthrough for me. And I never would have had that breakthrough if I didn't say, we're doing this, come
Mm.
play in this sandbox and teach me where the comedy is.
And you know what? As you were talking, I remember one of the things you said last time was that, and again, I don't know the terminology that you use, but you basically said the funniest comedy or the most relevant comedy has its basis in reality, like emotional reality. And
Yes.
so I can understand, like, it is funny. It is
Mhm.
so funny. And actually, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this. My favorite character is Linda. She, like,
Yes. Oh, I'm so glad.
the minute
Thank
she
you.
comes on, and I don't know if that's it's intended, she's intended to provide some, like,
Yeah.
comedic relief around around the
Yes.
intensity of the tension you just described. I'm not sure. We'll talk about her in a minute. Um,
Yes.
but I mean, it is reality. Like, this is the reality of the American history,
Yeah.
right? And so
Yes.
now we know better, but as a result of that, it becomes really complicated and it becomes a bit
Mhm.
of a political and cultural hot potato. So I
Yes.
can understand A, why it's funny because it's rooted in reality, but B, why it's really hard to sell because,
Yes.
yeah, you have the risk, you are taking a huge risk of offending a whole population of people.
You would think so, right? And that's why no one would ever do it.
Yeah.
But as it turns out, it's not as risky as you might think because if you bring in a diverse cast, they become your creative collaborators, and of course, they're never going to let you get away with being offensive. And you talk about the character of Linda Lee, who is an Asian American, Korean American actress, a wonderful actress. Ji Young Han plays her. And, I presented this character to G and I said, G, help me out because if done wrong, it's horrifying. It's some weird, cliche. But, I asked G, is there something here that you can find that's grounded and relatable? And she said, of course. She said, I can see my mom in this character. And I was like, done. Anytime somebody is playing their parent, that is bullseye, right? Because your attitude towards your parent is a loving takedown. That's what every kid wants to do to their parents. Our parents are ridiculous, but we love them. So as soon as G said that, I said, please just play your mom. And suddenly the comedy came through. And it's a very broad character, right? It's an immigrant playing a super patriot, literally dressed as Uncle Sam, a Reagan Republican who's herself an immigrant. So the contrast there is intrinsically comic, but again, I'm really relying on the actors to find the humanity that makes it so that it isn't offensive.
Huh. I the minute so when I watched it, and as I said, I watched it several times now because I go every time I watch it, I laugh at something different. But the minute a minute the historic Freedomburg goes away, and then I'm, faced with the two actors, like I'm laughing already.
Uh,
But it's funny. It kind of looks like it reminds me of an Australian pub that I went to many, many years ago, and I was like, oh, this could have been set in Australia. But
uh,
then yes, so I'm laughing already, and then I'm kind of going he the whole way. Like, this is so naughty, but this is
yeah,
so funny.
great.
And then that storyline plays out, and then Linda Lee comes on, and I'm just like literally rolling around the floor, going, "This is brilliant! I cannot wait to see where this goes," because
Great.
she's cracking me up, and I guess through my lens, and I'm a bit of a fan of watching those shows like Fresh Off the
Mhm.
Boat and Kim's
Yeah.
Convenience. So I love seeing the hard struggle of the Asian immigrant. I really love
Yes.
those
Yes.
stories, and so that's
Yes.
actually what I saw. And I was going, in my head, I'm going, yes, immigrants reign, immigrants reign. Like, this is so
Yes.
great. And we're kind of seeing
Yes.
this like casts of like with an E. And
Yeah.
I'm just going, oh, just even with the three, I don't know if you've got plans to bring in other characters, but I'm going, even
Mhm.
with the three, there is so
Mhm.
much in that. I cannot
Mhm.
wait. Like, I was pissing
Mhm.
myself. It was hilarious. Well done.
Thank you, thank you. Yes, I do plan to bring in more characters. Three felt like the right number, at the beginning. As I said, this was initially a half-hour pilot in concept. I pitched it to Fox last season, in fact, And translating it into a YouTube series meant simplifying things a little bit, starting out with three, fundamentally sketches. The unit of consumption, I feel, the unit of comedy on YouTube seems to me to be the sketch. And so I thought, okay, I will reconceive a pilot as a series of sketches. And when doing so, it had to simplify. It centers around the two male characters, Jefferson and Jupiter, but there was room for this third character for sure. In the next batch that I shoot, I do intend to expand the cast now. And this is interesting because, if you take my class on pilot writing, one of the things that I've discovered about pilots is fundamentally a pilot introduces the world and the characters. Now that I'm doing a pilot translated into a YouTube series, that same principle applies. So the first three episodes introduce the first three characters, but episodes 4, 5, and 6, I do want to introduce two more characters. That is my instinct on it. And then at that point, it feels to me like I really will have the ability to kind of go an infinite number of episodes. Once you have 5 characters, if you think about it, you have a lot of different combos. Whatever the mathematics of 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1 is, you as a math head can probably tell me what that number is. But that's the number of different character combinations you have. And each of those character combinations is its own flavor of funny. So once I've introduced a full 5 characters, then I have a lot of different places to go. And notice most sitcoms historically have a base of about 5 main characters. It's almost like a fundamental number after which you have infinite or seemingly infinite stories that you can do, because you just keep going back to different combos over and over again.
So you've actually just shared, you'd planned on doing a 30-minute pilot. Now you've broken it down into sketches. And actually at the
Yes.
beginning, you said it basically said it's the smallest thing I've done, but it's also the biggest thing that I've done.
Yes.
And
Yes.
the question when you said that, I was like, is there something inherently more challenging the smaller it becomes? Like, I
Oh,
find
yes.
synthesizing really hard. Like, I go, "Blah, blah, blah, I just want to be verbal diarrhea
Yes.
everywhere." And then I go, there's that Mark Twain saying, if I had more time, I would have written a shorter letter.
Yes.
Did you have that same challenge as well?
Absolutely. Trying to get a lot of exposition out quickly is difficult. And, I imagined that because I'm writing in sketch form, I have to adhere to sketch format. The sketch format typically is premise, escalation, escalation, twist. This, if you watch a sketch, again, if you take one of my classes, this is one of my secrets. The sketch format is a little different than any other unit of comedy. You typically get a laugh early on, and then you hit that same laugh in an escalated form a few times, and then you twist it for the ending. So I was trying to do that while introducing a world and character. So if you watch that first episode, the joke of the sketch is uh, a white Thomas Jefferson impersonator, irritated at the new guy who is not celebrating American history the way he thinks he should, and the white guy wants to give notes to the black guy on his own character. So that's kind of the initial laugh. Is there a reason you're playing this so depressed? That's kind of the first laugh, right? And then it escalates. As that conflict grows 2 or 3 times. And then it has a classic twist at the end, which is, hey, the black guy is going to play the white guy from now on. So that's the kind of twist you don't see coming. So it follows a classic sketch pattern. But within that sketch format, you're meeting 2 characters and actually 3 characters and seeing a world the way you would in a classic pilot. So yeah, it was definitely a bit of homework, especially in the first episode. Episode 2 gets a lot easier because we've kind of established the game of episode 2 at the end of episode 1. So episode 2, you'll see, which drops next week. The whole comedy is the two guys switching roles, and the black actor plays Jefferson as a villain, while the white actor tries to correct the black actor's performance by going, actually, you're a much better person than you claim to be, Mr. Jefferson. But he's doing it as a white guy playing a black slave. The, Honestly, it's one of the funniest things I think I've ever done. Like, the actors came through for me so hard on this, especially, I mean, Seth Morris having to play the white dude who's playing a black. It's impossible to do without uh, walking head on into cringe. So anyway, I got very lucky with the premise and the actors. But yes, this issue of, is it harder to do something shorter? It kind of is, yeah, for sure. But like I say, everybody rose to the challenge. So stick around for episode 2. You will be very pleased.
I can't wait. I'll also be looking for the format as well, the sketch format. We're going to talk more about all of that. But when we spoke last time, and obviously I pinned you down on the real math of business, and you tried
Yes.
to weave and dodge question, and then we got there, and then there were a couple of insights. But I hate to say it, you're a math nerd. Like, the number of times you've
Yeah.
said unit of comedy, you've talked about 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1, character combinations.
Yeah.
You've talked about the
Yes.
sketch format, which is,
Mhm.
the what was it? I've written prem, but I don't know what prem stands for.
Premise, escalation, escalation, twist. The premise,
Escalation,
it,
escalation,
it's
twist. Yes.
yeah, it's a format. Yeah.
Yeah. So you're like a total number nerd. One of the things that we talked about, one of the kind of insights I think, well, at least I had, at the end of our last episode, was where you talked about structure and flow, and we were talking
Yes.
about it in the context of the writer creating the structure and the actors creating the flow, and so there was this beautiful relationship between the two, and you've just actually talked about that in great detail with respect to Freedomburg. I'm curious if I needed to pin you down on a ratio of structure and flow,
Yeah.
given
Yes.
I've been thinking about our last conversation. I would love to know,
Mhm.
what's the successful ratio of structure and flow? Because you've just
Yes.
explained in real time
Mhm.
why that's so critical.
Yeah, such a great point. Let me give you a kind of roundabout answer to this. What I noticed when shooting this was that the thing we are trying to do in comedy is get to this magical moment where the performers uh, lose themselves in the performance, and they stop thinking about the lines. They stop uh thinking about themselves as actors, and they fall into the imaginary dream that they really are these people, and they really are saying these things, and they're actually reacting in real time. And interestingly, that only happens when you've provided them with sufficient structure that they can do it. The scene has a structure. The characters have been given things to do and things to say that happen at the right time. And what I noticed is typically around take 5 or 6 is when the magic happens. Take 1, they're trying to remember where to stand, and oh, I'm supposed to cross over here and then take off my jacket, and what was my line again. And take 2, they get a little bit better, and 3 and 4, they stop memorizing the lines, and they're walking where they're supposed to. And then suddenly on take 5 or 6, they're actually that person shouting at that other person and being hurt and getting angry and reacting and snipping. And so somehow the structure that you've created allows them to rise above reality and enter this funny dream. And that's what you capture with the cameras. And having recorded it, you now have something that you can edit and present to the people. And it's a funny way of looking at it, isn't it? So what is the ratio there? Well, the funny thing is, uh, when the magic happens, it's 100% imagination, but they could not get there without 100% focus on the structure. So it's 100 versus 100 is the weird mystical
I love
relationship.
that. I love that. And you know what? It's funny that you've used the word magic because last time you said it's about unpacking the magic beyond the
Hmm.
science. And
Hmm.
so there
Yeah.
is this like magical part that happens that, the actors create the magic and then the writer creates the science behind it. So that is awesome.
Yes, I would add something there, which is there's something going on that is familiar to all of us because all of us have played games as children. And you play little games of make believe as children. And maybe you can remember doing this as a kid. I
Mm.
remember being like in second grade, having a friend over to my house, and we had army men and we played a game and we made the army men go away around and we had a war. Okay. And I distinctly remember one time after playing for an hour with army men with my friend, he had to leave. His mom came to pick him up and we shook hands and he said, "Great war." And I go, "Good war." Right. And what had happened was somehow in the process of the game, we had lost ourselves in the imaginative narrative and we were in a little movie, and it is such a delightful experience when it happens to you. That's what happens to the actors when you provide them with the material and give them six takes. In that sixth take, suddenly they've become children again and have lost the sense that it's Wayne and Seth and G, and they've become Carl and Spencer and Linda, in this world that you've created. And the delight happens to the audience because we've filmed that and we present it to you and you get this contact high of their experience. That is actually what we're doing as filmmakers.
Wow, that is so very, very cool. What a privilege, like for me, to be at the contact high end of things. You guys do the hard work. I'm just gonna live and laugh um, because of your guys' hard work. I love that. I love that.
Yeah. Mhm. Yeah, I think that's what you're laughing at. Comedy is so mysterious, but ultimately, why you're laughing is that Seth and Wayne and G, they collectively created this imaginative experience, had the experience, we shot it, and then we edited it and presented it to you. And that's it. It's a contact high, basically, is what comedy filmmaking is.
I love it. Now, I want to link our conversation this morning and our conversation last time. You said earlier today, you said you loved, you've always had this like anti-establishment,
Mhm.
anti-corporate,
Mhm.
well, you said, anti-establishment, anti-corporate fun. And
Yes.
last time, the word, it's so funny, and this is, I'll come back to you. You are a numbers nerd because you said this word last time that it's just stuck in my head the whole time. You said metrification. And I went, oh, I love that. So metrification.
Sure.
Um, I would, for the benefit of us people who don't get the benefit of working in the creative world, and
Mhm.
certainly like at the top end of the creative world, you gave us a little flavor last time. But I would love to know, could you give us a bit of a history of
Mhm.
like comedy and a history of the
Mhm.
entertainment world? Because what I remember you saying last time is that you didn't go into any of the history, but you said it's harder now because
Yes.
people just want to produce proven success. And so that's
Yes.
becoming harder, and hence this new way of doing things. Could you
Yes.
take us, and I don't know where you start, wherever you want to
Sure.
start, could you just take us
Sure.
about where the entertainment world kind of started, how it went through
Yeah.
this metrification that has now
Yeah.
got you personally to a point where you're creating this stuff on YouTube and looking to build
Yes.
from there?
Well, it's a great question. If we just take a little brief history of television comedy, it starts with radio, and then you get shows like I Love Lucy, which are almost filmed radio shows. Lucille Ball herself started in radio. And Lucille Ball and her husband, the guy who played Ricky Ricardo, Desi Arnaz, they invented the modern sitcom. They started multicam television. They had the idea of what if we shot 3 cameras at once? The multicam TV show was born, and that's a tradition that really explodes in American television, especially the multicam sitcom reaches its heyday in the late 80s, early 90s with shows like the Cosby Show exploded, Roseanne, Seinfeld. But there was a period in which there were the top 20 shows on American television. Sorry, of the top 30 shows, 20 were multicam, comedies. Astonishing to think of that. And it's the heyday of American comedy, at least in terms of volume. The next big period in American TV comedy really is the streaming era. You have cable shows and cable comedies, which are its own tributary of American comedy. But then streaming comes in, and American audiences and global audiences get a taste for binge watching, which is new. We used to watch shows once a week, and suddenly we can watch 4 at once. This gives the audience an appetite for serial storytelling, where instead of each episode being its own play, the episodes link together. That's an outcome of serial storytelling on the streamers. And now we're in a new period, I think, where what we're finding is there is a calcification of the creativity, in my opinion, on the networks and the streamers as well. The problem is that it costs so much money to make a show. I mean, it literally costs anywhere between 300,000 on the low end and $1 million on the medium high end to make one episode of television. Okay. Once you are committing that much money, that means if you're going to make, even a 10 episode series, that's going to cost between 10 and $30 million to make. More likely 30 million, if you're making it for HBO or Netflix, but at least that the investment is too high for anybody to do it riskily. Once you're risking $10 million, you cannot say, shoot, let's throw it at the wall and see what sticks. And so what happens is, inevitably, people make stuff that is similar to the stuff that is already successful. Now, you can see what happens. Before long, nobody's making anything original. You can't, because you have to make it similar to what's already exists. You can make it a little bit original, but not too much. So where is originality going to come from? It is going to come from people making stuff outside of the system, and probably making stuff for super low budget. That is what finally convinced me to step into the YouTube realm. I firmly believe that the future of comedy will be found in shows like Historic Freedomburg and others. Creators using either their own money or using brand sponsorship to make low budget comedy that can risk being different from what we're seeing out there. So you watch Historic Freedomburg and you say, to my delight, oh, it feels a little bit naughty. Yes, that's what I'm looking for. That is the underserved market. The people who go, oh, they couldn't do this even on Fox, the rebel network of comedy, right? They certainly couldn't do it on CBS. That's what the comedy audience wants. We want originality, a feeling of risk and danger, and we always have. The only place you're going to find that is places where the commercial risk is low enough that the creators themselves can dare to do stuff that feels a little anti-authoritarian, anti-corporate, outside the box. So that's what finally pushed me to do, Historic Freedomburg on YouTube. That, and the fact that nobody in the legacy world would buy it.
Well, Brent, I mean, there's so much in there. And now that I'm calling you a numbers nerd and I am turning into a numbers nerd, I want to learn more about the history, but I'm going to park that for another time and we're going to get you back again. You've just dropped episode 1. You've told me that episode 2 is being dropped next week. Best case scenario, how do you see this going in the future? If you had a crystal ball, where, what happens to Freedomburg?
Okay, so this is what I'm planning, and this is a model that I would present to anybody who wants to try being a creator in a non-legacy space like YouTube. Step one is create material on my own dollar. So, I shot 3 episodes of Historic Freedomburg in a single day on a shoestring budget. I will do that again, and I'll end up with 6 episodes. Stage 2 of this business model is to use the 6 episodes to go after brand sponsorship. So I'll go out there and go, hey, Mountain Dew, I've got a subversive comedy here. You've got some hipster teenagers who like comedy. Want to sponsor this? Then I'll make round 2 or, season 2 and make 6 more episodes with my delighted cast. At that point, I'll be able to give everybody a raise. Everybody in the crew who, believed in this and worked for less than scale, all of my actors who worked for less than their, union dollars, everybody gets a raise in season 2. Then, stage 3, my dream is by getting corporate sponsorship to make material outside the box. Essentially, what I'm doing is creating IP or proof of concept that can be bought and repurposed back to the Netflix, CBS, NBC, Peacock, Amazon, HBO world. So it's a 3-stager: self-investment, brand sponsorship, upsell to the legacy networks. That's my goal for this. But honestly, if all that happens is I live forever on YouTube with brand sponsorship, that's fine with me, because the satisfaction of being a creator with no executive interference, allowed to play games with underemployed, brilliant performers, which is to say all performers, they're always underemployed. I mean, that's absolutely the dream for me. So I'll stay in phase 2 forever if I have to.
Oh gosh, I love that so much. I'm going to leave it right there. Step 1, 2, and 3, and my brain is just exploding with all of the different applications to that step 1, 2, and 3, not just the anti-establishment comedy genre. I think that's a really clever model. Professor Bifo, Brent, Seth, Wayne G, congratulations on Historic Freedomburg. I cannot wait to see the rest of the first season drop. I can't wait to start seeing Mountain Dew cans popping in the background and all the rest of it. Please say, you're a friend of the podcast now. Congratulations. We look forward to staying abreast of your success. Thank you again. And what a great chat with Brent. And this leads us right into our listener question. And if you want to submit a listener question, you can now email us at realmathofbusiness@gmail.com, or you can leave a comment on YouTube or Spotify and we'll hopefully get it into a future episode. This week's listener question for this episode is from Simone. Dear Alena, great episode with Dr. Cat. I liked learning about the concept of eudaimonia. For those of you who don't remember that, it's a Greek term that approximates to this idea of flourishing, and wanted to know, has your idea around this changed throughout your career of what success, flourishing, and eudaimonia looks like to you? Thank you, Simone. What a great question. And yeah, that was such a great conversation where I learned 2 concepts or 2 Greek words: eudaimonia, flourishing, and acedia, which is kind of the opposite, the languishing, the lack of purpose. So I'm going to answer your question with in the context of both of those things. So in terms of, I'll say success, because I want to say my early success actually was not eudaimonia, because it certainly wasn't flourishing. But I guess the first part of it is I probably thought it was flourishing. So success initially for me was doing the things, doing the done thing, ticking the boxes. I did my HSC, tick. I went to university, tick. I went to the right university, tick. I got my degree, tick. I started in a nice big corporate, tick. I got my postgraduate qualification, tick. I got the promotions, tick, 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 tick. I went overseas, tick. Probably at that point was the first point when I was overseas where I went, what now? And luckily there were still some boxes to tick, but I certainly sort of this idea of just ticking a checklist, I think that checklist started to cease to exist. certainly when I came back to Australia, moved into another corporate, and then chose to go and start my own business, what happened then was I entered a world where there was no done thing. There was no box to check or checklist to go through. And what that can do is create a bit of a series of existential crises. And I will be the first to say, I put up my hand. I've gone through all of the existential crises because of the lack of the checklist. Because it's so easy to take a checklist and go, yes, I'll do that, I'll do that, I'll do that, I'll do that. When you've got this blank page, you're kind of like, oh, you need to create the boxes to check. And how do I know if it's the right one? Are there better ones out there? I actually like how, and we just referred to it in that conversation, I like how Brent Forrester described his process or his paradigms as economic anxiety and creative freedom. So I think for me now, I am in that. So flourishing for me, or eudaimonia for me, really has moved into that creative freedom paradigm. But I think for me, if eudaimonia is flourishing, for me, the word flourishing, there's a sense of a movement and flow in that word. So it's not actually about success, like, oh, I've achieved success, but it's about the flow in the direction of what I think success looks like or what my North Star is. But contrast that to acedia, which I think we defined with Dr. Kat as a bit of a lack of purpose. For me, the energy around that term is stuck. It's stagnant. It's a very kind of, I'm just, stuck energy. And what I have found there, and I recently experienced that, I went to a coaching session with my amazing coach, Simon Bowen, and I said, Simon, I'm stuck. What actually was going on with that was I didn't have a lack of purpose. What happened there was I was confused. And so that confusion was what got me stuck. And what I needed and what we did through that coaching session was just kind of unstick me, unconfuse me, because I just needed some clarity on how I could get back into that movement and flow, which for me, I think what eudaimonia really is about for me is that movement and flow in the pursuit of creative freedom. So I know that was a very long-winded answer, Simone, but I hope that's helpful to just show the contrast and then show my journey over the years. And thank you for listening to The Real Math of Business with Alena Bennett. If you liked this episode, remember to subscribe for more content and stay on top of the real math of business. I've been Alena Bennett. Thank you for listening.